finally, let's talk about Bitcoin and specific stock valuations. So, there are several factors that could explain why Bitcoin is positively correlated with stock markets. The COVID-19 saw a significant increase of retail investors enter traditional stock markets and digital asset sectors. We also saw the meme stock movement in Q1 2021 only further exacerbate this flow of retail investors, prompting many to turn to crypto asset investments in addition to meme stocks. We saw a overall general large rise of retail investors entering the stock market, particularly in the post-COVID era in 2020 and 2021. Many of them would turn to crypto at the same time and would double dip, so to speak, and begin to experiment and invest in both markets. So we're starting to see stronger correlation with that alone. Institutional investments continued to amass in 2021, signaling the continuing inflow of funds into the crypto space from large players and market movers that already have holdings in traditional sectors. And now we're starting to see an overlap of the same people, whether that's retail investors, institutions, or fund managers, not only dominating and using their funds in traditional sectors, but are also turning to crypto to take advantage of the large valuation gain possibilities. Now, if both stock markets and crypto markets consist of increasingly the same people, the same participants, the same money, so to speak, correlations between both movements in both sectors can continue to grow. So this is something that we want to keep an eye on. How correlated are these markets? We've saw a significant shift from 2020 onwards. Where will this correlation go? Only time will tell. Now here is a specific Bitcoin correlation chart with specific crypto related assets, and particular individual stocks, not so much just the S&P or the Dow Jones or NASDAQ. This is from the Dow Jones market data. So here's a 20-day rolling correlation. And particularly from 2020, 2021, we're seeing extreme amounts of correlation increased between the S&P 500 and Bitcoin, right? Somewhere ranging between 0.2 and 0.3 of a positive correlation. We already spoke about gold, where we did see a positive correlation at times and also negative at times. So this does vary. And we also saw a strong negative correlation between the US dollar index and Bitcoin. Now, here we see a listing of various companies that arguably are related to Bitcoin, whether they are directly invested in Bitcoin, such as Grayscale, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, or the MicroStrategy Incorporated, which is one of the really first or one of the earlier investments, institutional investments in Bitcoin, particularly in August 2020. We also see the Van Eck digital transformation ETF, Riot Blockchain, which is Bitcoin mining or crypto mining company, which is publicly traded, Square, which is publicly announced that they would hold Bitcoin on their balance sheets, Overstock.com, which is invested in Bitcoin, Marathon Digital Holdings, which is another crypto mining company, Tesla, and we also see other crypto-related companies. Tesla also holds Bitcoin on their balance sheet, but also opted to accept Bitcoin for Tesla cars for a certain period of time. Galaxy Digital Holdings, another crypto-based investment fund. PayPal, which is offered a crypto-based services similar to Square through Cash App and Venmo, respectively, where you could purchase Bitcoin, and other companies such as Coinbase, Nvidia, which produces the cards necessarily, the equipment necessary for Bitcoin and general crypto mining as well. Here we see general amounts of varying positive correlations, right? So the Bitcoin Trust, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, MicroStrategy Incorporated, their stock valuations are highly correlated with Bitcoin, which makes sense because their business has invested so much into crypto. It has invested so much into Bitcoin. So it makes sense that they are highly positively correlated, even with Grayscale. The Grayscale Bitcoin Trust is at a zero point 0.8 positive correlation. Now, MicroStrategy at about 0.7, 0.75, give or take. What's interesting here is that we take a look at something such as Coinbase. Coinbase here we see, according to the Dow Jones, has a 0.3 positive correlation, indicating that while Coinbase, being a crypto exchange, does have a correlation with a positive correlation where if Bitcoin goes up, Coinbase will go up as well. Bitcoin goes down, Coinbase will go down as well. It's only a 0.3 correlation. So the rate of change or the rate of positive correlation is not as severe as, say, MicroStrategy or the VanEck Vectors Digital Transformation ETF. So we're starting to see varying levels of correlation, not just whether or not it's positive or if it's negative. So while Bitcoin's correlation with the S&P 500 and NASDAQ indices hover around a relatively low correlation of 0.2, we see that Bitcoin invested firms show a far higher correlation than just the S&P 500 or NASDAQ. Tesla had a 0.55 correlation with Bitcoin. MicroStrategy had about a 0.7 correlation with Bitcoin. The Grayscale Bitcoin Trust had a 0.8 correlation with Bitcoin. Next, let's take a look at each of these price charts or some of these charts and see how they line up with Bitcoin's performance. So here we see on the weekly chart, this is Bitcoin in the blue, Bitcoin in US dollar, and Tesla in orange. Particularly, once again, we're focusing predominantly on 2020 onwards. This is where we start to see this significant shift in correlation between Bitcoin and other asset classes. We do see generally, as Bitcoin was going up, Tesla was going up as well. Generally, right? This is one particular moment where we did see Bitcoin falling from about 60,000 going to maybe 49, and at the same time we do see Tesla going up generally. What's interesting here is that if we look at the overall trend, Bitcoin was staying in this range, whereas in this higher range of about 50,000 and higher, whereas Tesla was generally falling from this high of about $900, give or take, and falling to a low of about maybe $650, give or take, right? During the same time period that Bitcoin was in this tumultuous time period, this overall market crash, Tesla was falling as well, but was much faster to rally, right? There was still several months where Bitcoin was not only staying at these lower levels in the 30,000s, but continuing to depreciate and falling to a low of about 29,000. Tesla did fall from a high of about 750 to a low of, say, let's say 600, give or take, maybe 550, but was faster. And we start to see a negative correlation here. Tesla is coming up, Bitcoin is coming down during the same time period. Following that, going into July and late July, Bitcoin bottoms out, and we do see this overall positive correlation continue to play out as Bitcoin went up and produced an extreme new all-time high. Tesla did at the same time. And we also saw the same thing. Bitcoin's falling down. Tesla is falling as well, alongside with many other tech companies during this time period in late 2021 going into 2022. Here is the chart of Bitcoin in blue and the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust in orange. And what's not surprising here, we do see a highly an even stronger correlation between these two compared to Bitcoin and Tesla, mainly due to in part the fact that the Grayscale Trust is heavily directly invested into Bitcoin. So here we see just a general correlation between the price patterns. Specifically, once again, we're focusing on 2020 and onwards. Now here we see Square, and this is where we start to see varying levels of correlation. Square particularly reached a bottoming point in March 2020, coinciding with Bitcoin's bottom, and we do see this general movement upwards coinciding with Bitcoin's price trend. We see a new all-time high for Square observed of about 270, give or take, nearing or almost near at the same time Bitcoin produced its new all-time high of about 64,000 in Q2 2020. Now at the same time, Bitcoin falls in May. Square fell at the same time as well. And once again, we do see, along with many tech companies, Square, Tesla, that have opted to invest or are related to or offer Bitcoin services or cryptocurrencies services, were falling at the same time in May, but produced a stronger and a faster recovery, I should say. Not necessarily stronger, but a faster recovery from May going into June and July, whereas Bitcoin was much more pronounced and elongated this downtrend up into the end of July, where it would finally reverse. Now, what's interesting here, Square is starting to decline at the same time Bitcoin was, right? Producing arguably a much more severe decline in September. What this could be associated with the general market decline in September due to the Evergrande crisis and various other factors and global economic instability. What's interesting here is while Bitcoin was reaching a bottom and would reverse to the upside in late September, early October, and produce this new all-time high, Square would actually reverse at the same time, but would have a not as extreme price recovery compared to Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin was down at 43,000, give or take, and would go on to produce an all-time high of about 69,000. Square would not quite do so. Square would remain around this $260 level, which is just below its all-time high of about 270. PayPal, similar to Square, shows a similar price pattern. What's interesting here, we do see this divergence between PayPal continuing to increase from May into June and July, and while Bitcoin was falling. Another interesting point here is PayPal reached an extreme high or a local high in August of 2021, and while Bitcoin was starting to reverse at this time to the upside, right? Bitcoin was it formed this bottoming pattern and is starting to come up to the outside and reverse upwards. From this point onward, PayPal would show a negative, or arguably a negative, correlation with the general market movement of Bitcoin. There are specific moments, such as in September, where Bitcoin would fall, but PayPal would fall as well. But as Bitcoin would stop and ultimately halt and reverse back to the upside and produce its new all-time high, PayPal would continue this downward trend and really mostly erase most of its gains post 2020. Here's an example. This is with Overstock.com. General market correlation with Bitcoin. What's interesting here is just this overall price pattern in May. This is quarter 2 2020. Really, Overstock producing these extreme market increases from about $5 of a low observed in March 2020 to a high of $115, give or take. So that's an extreme market increase, particularly from in span of maybe 2-3 months, and then ultimately falling down. Here we do see overstock falling at the same time Bitcoin is coming up. So we're starting to see variance in the level of correlation between these companies. They're not always directly correlated, which is why it's not a one-to-one correlation. It's not completely mimicking Bitcoin's price patterns, but the general market movements, we are starting to see patterns between these companies that are associated with Bitcoin. Here's a Riot in the orange color. This is a Bitcoin mining company, a publicly traded one. Here we really start to see great levels of correlation, particularly in these general price patterns, right? What's interesting here, though, is that following the May crash of crypto, we start to see this reversal in July, late July going into August of 2021. Bitcoin goes from a low of about 30,000, goes on to produce a new all-time high of 69,000. At the same time, Riot did not produce a new all-time high. While Bitcoin did, Riot remained relatively the same and really stayed within this range. Yes, there was a noticeable increase in valuation coinciding with this market reversal, but it wasn't as severe as, let's say, the market increase from the start of 2021 going into maybe February or March 2021, where Riot would produce this new all-time high of about $74 per share. Here's Mara Digital. This is another Marathon. This is another Bitcoin mining company. Different story than Riot, interestingly enough here. Marathon, we're going to focus on 2020. What's interesting, just seeing that Marathon having this all-time high, launching and showing being listed as a publicly traded company in 2015, and then ultimately falling in valuation. Now, what's interesting here is that while Riot produced its all-time high in the first wave, or if you want to arguably even call this the first cycle of Bitcoin in 2021, Marathon did the opposite. It produced a high here, fell down with Bitcoin, but instead of producing a lower high just like Riot did, Marathon actually produced an even higher high, coinciding with Bitcoin's all-time high of 69K. Here's NVIDIA. NVIDIA really producing extreme highs, coinciding with Bitcoin's new all-time high. NVIDIA producing a all-time high of about 330, give or take. Now, what's interesting here is that while Bitcoin was falling during this time period, NVIDIA did fall a noticeable amount, but it wasn't as severe as several other of the correlated companies such as Tesla, PayPal, Square, any of the two mining companies, or even the Grayscale fund, right? There was a noticeable dip, but then quickly, at the same time that Bitcoin was to form some sort of bottom, it had a relief rally and then continued downward. Generally, we can consider this as a overall downward movement. NVIDIA was quickly able to reverse and continue its overall uptrend, right? Now, there is a noticeable amount of correlation between NVIDIA and Bitcoin, as seen here, but even if Bitcoin was producing these lowering movements, the demand for video cards and really just the overall profits that NVIDIA was making, whether that's the extreme graphics card shortage, which is used for not only Bitcoin mining, but for computers, laptops, even cars and other home services and home technological equipment. I hear even laundry services and certain TVs are using these cards as well, using equipment that NVIDIA would make. the demand for graphics card and the demand for these kinds of technologies and equipment is just all too high, especially during this time where there's severe supply shortages. So while we do see correlation between Bitcoin and Nvidia, overall Nvidia can still noticeably in this uptrend, even if Bitcoin was falling in prices. And we do see the same thing similar with AMD, another microchip, microprocessing chip. These, while there was noticeable correlation with Bitcoin, arguably not as much with compared to Nvidia, particularly in early 2021. We do see that there is a strong level of correlation, particularly in the second half of 2021, particularly from July and onwards, almost mimicking Bitcoin's price movement.